So once again, welcome back. You just completed the second installment for this year's Seed Series with Supercritical LLC, talking about how to crack the startup funding code. In this next video, we're going to be talking to Andy Poticha of Cannabis Facility Construction about how to build and design your new cannabis facility. You definitely don't want to miss this.
Good morning. My name is Andy Poticha, and I'm with Cannabis Facility Construction, one of three verticals that's part of our parent company, Mosaic Construction. We're going to spend the next 30 or 40 minutes or so discussing how we might be able to help you with the design and the building of your new cannabis facility. So we're going to talk a little bit about in our agenda, we're going to talk a little bit about who we are and what we do and how we've done it. We're going to talk a little bit about your facility and how we might be helpful for you. We're going to talk about the construction process, including different nuances between design bid build and design build, hiring a contractor, timing, pricing, and so on. We're going to offer you some resources. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how we do it the right way. So let me tell you a little bit about us and who we are. As I mentioned, Cannabis Facility Construction is one of three verticals of our parent company, Mosaic Construction, which is a relationship-based 30-year-old residential and commercial design build company located here in Northbrook with experience from high-end residential to boutique commercial and multifamily work. And almost 6 years ago, one of our commercial clients broached us and said, we just won 3 medicinal dispensary licenses here in Illinois, and we know we have no idea what we're doing in this space, and we're pretty sure you don't have an idea what you're doing in this space. But you are our trusted design build partner, and we're going to figure it out together. Well, fast forward as the industry has become more matured, although it's still, I would say, not in its infancy as it was 6 years ago, maybe a little bit more juvenile today, that we have garnered an enormous amount of experience, and we'll talk a little bit about the benefits of that later, including completing over 30 projects in 10 states. So ultimately, we became a national business. Our clients happen to range from independents and startups to multi-state operators. And we are a full service company that can help our clients from the design and engineering and procurement standpoint all the way through a turnkey operation at the end. So enough about us. Let's talk about how we might be helpful to you. So your facility, your business, as it says in Hamilton, in the room where it happens. So how to get started? Well, we know that specifically in Illinois, and since cannabis is not legal federally, that you really are bound by the state in which you're located. You can't bring things across state lines. And so we know that you are going to be limited to the products that you're going to be able to acquire and what you're going to be able to sell, and maybe even at what rate you're going to sell them at. So how do you separate yourself? Well, let's talk about there's sort of two environments. There's the retail environment, and then there's the industrial environment, and they're very different. But in some cases, they are the same. So when we talk about the retail environment, we need to really take a look at how do we make ourselves different than what our competition is. So there's a couple of ways in which you can do that. If you know that you are providing the same or similar products as your competition, it's going to be other external factors that are going to come into play. Speed in which a client comes through your operation, the cost in which they're going to be able to acquire their cannabis, and of course the entire environment itself. So when we first started, not having anything to look back on here at Illinois, we took a field trip out to Colorado and to Arizona. And what we found was everything from a glorified doctor's office to something very high-tech and sophisticated like an Apple store or a Starbucks. And we came back and we met with our team and we said, how do we create an environment that's going to be different here than our competition? And so we really took a look and said, who is our customer base? And we wanted to take a look at things through their lens. And so we figured, well, and again, this is 6 years ago. So we didn't, Illinois was still in program status, and it certainly, cannabis was not nearly as accepted as it is today, or even talked about for that matter. So we thought to ourselves, what would it be like if our grandmothers had to go in and get medicine for the very first time? They certainly wouldn't want to go into another doctor's office, and I'm quite sure they wouldn't feel so comfortable working by themselves in a Starbucks situation, looking at a menu or working off of a tablet, trying to pick and choose what products that they would like. So we sat with our clients and we created an environment that was going to be much more about wellness, much more about customer service and the client experience, where with our particular client, they wanted to take their clients from the beginning of when they walked in the door, through a waiting area, through a consultation area, through the dispensary, and ultimately answering questions and helping them exit from the building, knowing that they were there for future business from them. The industrial side, it's a little bit different. When we talk about facilities, whether they be cultivation or processing, much of this is driven really by two factors. It's really driven by the processor or the grower, and it's driven by operations. And so the idea is not so much about the direct client experience, because those facilities don't have client interaction on a daily basis, but it's really about creating the best product and doing it the most efficiently and being able to get it out the door as quickly as possible. So we need to make sure that we are considering what the environment is. How do you create a grow environment or a processing environment which produces the best product, the most efficient, the most timely, so that ultimately clients are getting the best, being able to charge the most they possibly can for it, and then working with operations to be able to deliver that product from the time that raw goods come into the building to the time that finished goods leave. So let's talk a little bit about how this all interacts with the commission. We do know that every jurisdiction in the United States has their own little nuances. And we also know that Illinois, from the medical program, really became the poster child or poster children of what good looks like. And other states have emulated us as they have gone from to medicinal and then ultimately to recreational. And most of that is because of the restrictions and the compliance that the Illinois Cannabis Commission has developed over time. Most of you know that every square inch of a facility is under constant surveillance by the state police, and you have to have 90 days worth of backup of tape, and it has to be stored off-site. And so there are a lot of things that most people don't know. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about working with people with experience. And so the idea about compliance is something that has to absolutely be taken seriously. Back in the day, we happen to have been the first group that was able to have an operation get a license in the same day when it went through the commission inspection, because we had not only done the appropriate job by complying with building codes, but our client had done a yeoman's job with operations, including standard operating procedures, to make sure that they were fully prepared for that inspection. And so over time, the Compliance Commission has become much more restrictive, as I've mentioned, including what you say you're going to build is going to be important as to what exactly it is that you do. That I can tell you that we do know that we didn't have to have real estate when we looked at the 75 social equity dispensary licenses in order to be able to apply. But what I can tell you is that when you do get your real estate in line, that you're really going to need to be able to compare that to what it is that you said that you promised you were going to build. I can tell you that in other states, that commissions have held license holders to the point where if you said you were going to build 2 bathrooms and you only built 1, that they would not grant their license. So when we mention prioritize compliance or suffer the consequence, you have to take that seriously. So let's talk a little bit about how we go down that path from day one. So when we talk about the construction process, we talk about there are really sort of 2 tracks that you can go down. One is the traditional design, bid, build, and the other one is design, build. So let me just briefly talk about both of those and where the benefits and detriments are. Design, bid, build is where you would hire a separate architect and have a separate contractor and potentially go out to multiple contractors at one time, where you would then make a decision in many cases based on a lot of external factors, not the least of which is who's got the least expensive cost. The challenge with that really is twofold. One, more often than not, the contractor has not been privy to why decisions have been made in the design process. So their ability to be able to offer alternative solutions is capped because they don't really understand why things are the way they are. Because usually they're the last person to join the team. The other issue that you have as a challenge is that you have the owner, you, being put in the middle of being the arbiter between disputes between the contractor and the architect. Because you have relationships with both, but they don't have relationships with each other. How do you solve that? Well, there's a method that's been around for years, and it has gained a lot more popularity because, as we talk about time, the one commodity they're not making any more of, that you're able to do some things in the design build process that are different than design bid build. And that is, you've got one point of accountability. You're able to integrate your design and construction with one team from the very beginning. The contractor's on board. They can make sure that things that are coming through design have an understanding of how long they take to procure and execute, what the cost implications are, so that you can make real-time decisions on whether that's a route you want to go down. And because the industry is evolving so quickly and so consistently, probably more so than even the tech industry at this point, that there are opportunities that come up all the time about this new piece of equipment, this new process, this new control system, that you're able to look at it in real time with the design, as opposed to having everything on paper and then looking at what your costs are and potentially going back for value engineering, which was a term that seemed to take hold in the 2000s. You're doing your value engineering in real time, which really allows you to be able to spend more time focusing on developing and running your cannabis business. So in our business, we have sort of a 4-pronged approach. We help you assess your site, which then goes back to what I was mentioning with regards to compliance and speaking about what it is that you said you were going to build. On the cultivation side, I know we all had to provide real estate alongside of our applications. So if we talked about that we were going to build a vault to house our products with certain construction, the state is going to offer points based on that. And their argument, if you don't do it, as I mentioned earlier, is going to be, you said you were going to do it, you got the points for it, we're holding you to it, even if it's beyond what the requirements are. So in the design part of it, as we go through it, a good designer's function really is to get inside your head and help you articulate that which you can't do yourself on paper. And so it's really not about us. What it is we use our experience to be able to take what it is that you're trying to accomplish from an operations standpoint and from an experience standpoint, and help articulate that on paper the most efficiently and the most cost effectively, guiding you along the line. We then go through the construction process, which we'll talk about in a little bit as well. And then ultimately we would transform the empty space into the dream of your new retail space or your cultivation or your processing facility. And most of the experience for us, I would say that about 95% of our experience has been in remodeling. We take existing buildings and we convert them to retail or to processing and or cultivation, which is, of course, the most challenging. It's the most challenging from timing. It's the most challenging from being able to execute your scope. It's the most challenging from cost. And I would suggest in many cases, both on the 75 dispensary licenses and the 40 craft grows, my guess is that most of you are looking at or have looked at or will be looking at existing buildings. So let's talk about experience and let's talk about learning on the job. 6 years later, there are a lot more things that we know, and there are a lot more things that have been streamlined and transformed in the industry and more stable. There are more stable processes. There are more stable and reliable products and pieces of equipment that are out there. And those experiences, those tales from the trenches, and being able to navigate those landmines are absolutely things that are incredibly valuable to you when you're going through your design and your build process. Why is that the case, you ask? Well, at the end of the day, it's really for a couple of reasons that are going to be meaningful for you. It's going to be speed to market, both on the design part of the project as well as the execution part of the project. I know that when we were first starting out, our first dispensaries, which were all of maybe 3,000 to 6,000 square feet, were taking us 12, 14, 15 weeks to complete because at the time we didn't know what we were doing. And today we're able to transform that into 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the size of the facilities that we're building on the. And so we are looking at retail facilities that at this point, because we're recreational, that are considerably larger. So from 5 to 10,000 square feet, we're able to do them in less time than we could do half the size 6 years ago. And time is money. If you've got speed to market, you are able to get ahead of your competition. You're able to sell more. You're able to realize returns for your investment or your partner's investments. Similar situation on the cultivation side, and maybe more importantly, because on the retail side, if you've got some retail experience as a contractor, that would be helpful. Although retail in cannabis is not the same as retail in a clothing store. We have situations where you've got retail compared with security, compared with medical, compared with other compliance issues, which is a lot different than, say, a Patagonia or a Starbucks or a Walgreens. On the cultivation side, it's way different. The only thing that might be comparable is if you've had experience in the food service industry and growing. And that is that not only is it important that you create an environment that is ideal for growing, but just as important is that there is exposure to elements that you don't want into your facility. Having pathogens inside your facility can absolutely change crops, and crops, to lose a crop could be millions of dollars, and then starting that process over, which could be in some cases 6 weeks or longer, from bringing it from the taking clippings from genetics through mothers, through vegetative to flowering, and then ultimately through trimming and dry cure, trimming, and then processing if you're doing it in the same place, or packaging and sending it out. So we have worked with many companies that are vertically integrated, and we really understand this, both from independents and from MSOs, which are multi-state operators. And I think what's important is that when you look and you take this experience along with the design build approach, you are able to get as many team members as possible into the mix and taking the typical challenges that many people have and turning them into opportunities. So one of those challenges we had this year that we turned into an opportunity for us was working through the pandemic, which of course, unfortunately, is not completely over. And when this happened a year ago, this coming March, we weren't even aware that we would be considered an essential business. So we proactively approached all of our clients and all of our trades and asked them if we were given permission, would we be able to continue working with them? There wasn't a client that refused. They all wanted their projects done. And believe it or not, on a national scale, we only had one trade that was reticent about moving forward with us. And so we took that really to heart with this one particular trade, and we decided that we were going to be the most proactive as we could possibly be and address the concerns that we had, given the fact, like we talked about 6 years ago, we were in a business that we didn't know very much about, and that there weren't that many players and that many growers, so there wasn't a lot of information to go back on. Similar situation with COVID-19. There wasn't a lot of information. So we looked to the CDC as our guide, and we were following as closely as we possibly could how we could be on the forefront of what good looked like. So we decided that we were going to create white papers and educate our trades. We were going to educate our clients. We were going to educate other general contractors. And we created safety buckets and protocols where we would have in our cultivations our trades coming in and being checked with head thermometers to make certain that nobody was sick and nobody had a fever. And if they were, they would not be allowed to work on the site. We were able to change the way we did business by creating shifts of people, because you can't normally have, especially when you're under a time crunch, to be able to have the same amount of trades working in the same space with social distancing created a serious concern. So we really had to sort of reinvent the way we do work, and the ability of being design build, and the ability of being flexible, and the ability of working in confined spaces that are occupied really helped us be able to not only be best in class for our clients, but help educate our trades and ultimately other general contractors out there. So when we talk about things like PPE, no longer optional, it's absolutely required on our jobs. Cleaning and disinfecting, absolutely required on our jobs. And how do we operate with dealing with not only delays that we can control by scheduling ourselves, but how do we deal with delays, and how are we proactive with the items that we cannot control, such as deliveries or production of materials that we're waiting for from a third party to come to us. So collaboration is really key, because we can't do this alone. And the only way to be able to get through a situation like a pandemic, which is still going on, is to be able to have as many options and be as flexible as we possibly can. So what's really important is making sure that you choose the right general contractor to help execute the construction. And the right general contractor, making that decision, has got many factors, cost being one of them. And I would argue that cost, while very important, is equally as important as hiring a general contractor that has experience, hiring a general contractor that can adequately set your expectations and communicate and monitor those expectations on an ongoing basis, so that you really understand when your project is going to be delivered, what opportunities and challenges are you facing. So one of them, specifically with regards to the pandemic, as I mentioned, we had a trade that was actually working on a project and refused to go forward. Thankfully, we've got a great deep bench of trade partners that we were able to plug and play somebody else into the project, get them up to speed relatively quickly, and be able to execute the work. And actually, ironically, in this particular project, we were actually able to save a little bit of money and get the project done a little bit faster than we had even anticipated. As I mentioned, piecemeal communication. I think it's really important that you've got one point of accountability. The design build approach certainly allows you to do that, as opposed to, again, the architect and the contractor putting the owner in the position of being the arbiter of who's right, who's wrong, and where information is coming from. Being vigilant in your scheduling and your monitoring are absolutely key to success. As I mentioned, there are things that are going to happen. Who knew about a pandemic? Who knows what's coming in 2021 that can challenge us? We certainly know that if, as suspected, that licenses for the 75 dispensaries and the 40 cultivations are going to come right back to back along with the next round, which is what everybody's hoping and anticipating, you're going to have a situation where in Illinois, people are going to be stretched for not only labor and experience, but they're going to be stretched for getting materials, the types of materials that go into these types of facilities. So something to think about and take into consideration. You have to have an open line of communication on both sides. So contractors and architects that are good will do a wonderful job of setting expectations. And it's really important that you need to make sure that you're communicating where you are with expectations. It's not only is it important to tell us where things seem to be off track, but I also will tell you that in this business, for sure, you catch a lot more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. So letting your team know when they're doing well, I think is really, really important. And that is maintaining a proactive relationship on both sides. So let's talk a little bit about timelines and prices. And I can tell you a little bit about some things that I think are important to consider, and I think that are important to really clear up. I mentioned earlier when we were talking about the fact that most of our work is value add in existing buildings, that it's really, really difficult to talk about where things cost and how much things cost per square foot. It's getting a little bit easier because we've got lots of experience. So we've got a track record of being able to go back to 30 projects and talk about this particular project at this size in this particular jurisdiction costs this much per square foot based on a number of factors, based on the approvals that we get from the commission, approvals that we get from the municipalities, talking about COVID, talking about deliveries, talking about the scope of work. Whereas opposed to having new construction, it's a little bit easier to talk about because you've got some of those external factors, but you're not fighting the existing conditions inside a building. That sometimes, if you've ever done any remodeling, you know that there are many do-it-yourselfers and many projects that have been done with or without permits that you just don't know about because they're not documented. So when you open up a wall, you might find something that you didn't anticipate. Sometimes those challenges create opportunities, and sometimes those challenges are just challenges. And you've got to be able to be flexible and being able to move as these external forces come down the pike. You've got, when you're talking about cultivation and processing, I would say that retail might be a motorboat, and cultivation and processing is more like a cruise ship. You can't maneuver as quickly as you can with a smaller. That means that you've really got to be able to take into consideration, in as much time as you possibly can, being proactive, what scheduling looks like, how things change, and how you can move and shift something that was supposed to be delivered here is going to be a couple weeks late. What can you move around to keep projects moving forward? So I think one of the things, and I've alluded to it a couple of times, is your site selection and getting your design work. You want to try to get as much of that done now as possible. If you're waiting for your social equity licenses, I would encourage you to start looking at sites now. Even if you don't lock them up, at least you've got an idea of 2-3 possible sites. You might even consider taking your work that you applied for, the initial plans, both on the retail as well as the cultivation and processing side, and start developing those. Start looking at materials, start looking at things that are going to go into these facilities, so that you're not starting the design process over square one from day one the minute that you get your license. The minute that the longer you can plan ahead, the faster you're going to be able to go to market. And we don't really know at this point what the state is going to hold to with their 6-month mandate from the time licenses are awarded until the time that they expect you to be up and running. So let's talk about costs a little bit. As I mentioned, for the same things that affect timelines, they affect costs. Again, as I said, cost per square foot, what they were 6 years ago, are a little bit different than they are today, some of which is because we know what we're doing, some of which is because we've gone from medicinal to retail. And retail, recreational, is completely different than medicinal from the standpoint of you have many companies out there today have got specific lines and specific operational standard operating procedures that they've set up for pre-orders, which are different than having that consultative approach. Some people know exactly what they want, they know how to get it, they place an order, they come in and they're able to pay for it and leave. And you don't want necessarily that to interfere with your clients that are still looking for that consultative approach. So I can tell you that people ask me, what can I use even as a budget? So this is going to be a very big range. But I would tell you both on the retail side as well as on the cultivation and processing side, depending on square footage, depending on where the building is, depending on all of these other external factors, not the least of which is how are you outfitting this building? How much are we putting into what we call FF&E, which is furnishings, fixtures, and equipment. What scope, what kind of quality are you putting into this? You could range anywhere from $150 a square foot to $350 a square foot, from 3,000 square feet to 50,000 square feet on the cultivation and processing side. So it's really, really important that you try to nail down as much about what it is that you're trying to put into this so that you can help determine your budget if that is going to be necessary to help you tie a bow and close the loop on getting financing. So let's talk a little bit about us, so I can tie a bow in this. We've got some references that we are posting that I know that you'll be able to jot down, from podcasts we've been on to other tales from the trenches that we have both here and on our website, which you can get to at cannabisfacility.net. That's cannabisfacility.net. That you'll be able to look at our experience and look at other organizations and other links that we have that can help you with anything from site selection through helping you get through the process and create the best facilities you can. So we like to think we do it the right way. And we like to think that because we have got much more experience than most of the other people that have in the industry. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for nearly 6 years, have completed over 30 projects in 10 states nationally. And so we understand and we are able to help our clients differentiate the customer experience for their clients, because we've worked with so many different multi-state operators and independents, all of which have been different. We are able to understand and help our clients through the challenges and the landmines with compliance. We do this through using the design build approach, which, by the way, doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be hired to do the architecture and engineering. What it does mean is that we are working along closely with whomever that architect and engineer is from inception. I think that's really the key nuance. You might have an architect or engineer that's got experience that you already have a relationship with. Having a contractor on board and having everybody else on board as early as possible, including anybody that's going to be helping you with your retail experience, from your marketing through interior design, through public relations, and so on. So you want to be able to put together an experienced team, because if you're learning on the job, I can tell you from experience, having the last 6 years of being able to get an incredible education at the benefit of our clients helping us along the way, learning alongside their experience, their experiences. And I would say, and I don't know if I mentioned this quote before, so I do. If I did, I apologize. But there's a great quote by Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, and that is, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly. So you're always going to see more, learn more how to do it the wrong way than the right way. So better to work with people that have been there and gone through the trenches. And don't let the pandemic get you down. And that's just COVID-19. Who knows what the next challenge is going to be? And so make sure you're working with people that are not only experienced, have done this before, but have the wherewithal, the flexibility, and the deep bench to be able to take you through the rest of the way when challenges, when they can turn challenges into opportunities. So again, Andy Poticha, Cannabis Facility Construction, part of Mosaic Construction. Just want to thank you very much for joining and listening. You can get some more information from us on our website under info@cannabisfacility.net. And please understand that we review every inquiry, and we do have senior people respond when requests have been asked. So I hope you have a great day and look forward to speaking with you soon.